The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
All right, everyone, thanks for coming. Well, who would have thought a talk about Thomas Merton, we'd have a full house here. At 5 of 12, there was like one person here. I wasn't, when I pick out the books for our new book review, you never know how many people were going to come, but I knew people would come to this because I also am a big fan of Thomas Merton. He died in 1968. His books are all still in print. There's still people writing books about him, as Walt will tell you. This is a brand new book. There'll probably be more because this is 100th anniversary of his birth. I got to tell you that last week we had a book review. It was called The Sixth Extinction. It was about science and climate change and evolution and all that, and species extinction. But today's book, we have more people, so that must say something. I don't know, Walt. You're going to have to address that. So here's Walt. Is it Chura, right?
Chura. Mm-hmm.
Walt Chura. There's a Thomas Merton Society of the Capital Region as part of the international group. Walt is the founder, and he's going to talk about this new book, Divine Discontent, the Prophetic Voice of Thomas Merton.
Okay. Thank you. It's great to be here. It's great to be here, and it's great. I agree with Joe. It's great to see the number of people who are still interested in Merton and want to hear about him and read about him and read him. That's the most important thing. Reading about Thomas Merton is that's great, but that's like reading about a good cookie. You got to munch. You got to munch, but. Let's talk a little bit about. Before I go on to that, yes, we have a Thomas Merton Society of the Capital Region. We do a number of things. Bernie DeRochen and I were just talking about one of our fading meetings. We were meeting every week. In the spirit of Thomas Merton, to pray Vespers together, the evening prayer of the monks, and when we started out, we would get anywhere from 5 to 10 people, not big crowds. At the our last place has been at the Franciscan Chapel on Wolf Road in the shopping center, following St. Francis's pattern of ministry in the marketplace. So they have this chapel right in the middle of the shopping center. But those of us who were going to that are getting older, and especially in the winter, and it's dark at 4:30, and you're supposed to be at the chapel for 6:30, and it's pitch dark, and the old thing. There'll be others there. They don't need me. We end up sometimes a lone prayer, sometimes a community of two. So anyway. What I want to say right off is, if you have a serious interest in Merton, doesn't mean you've already read a lot, but have a serious interest in Merton, I'd encourage you to get a hold of me so I can put you on our email list, and you'll know events that are coming up. And as Joe said, we, like the International Thomas Merton Society, will have some special things because of the 100th anniversary. I don't know if you've got pens or anything, but my email address is ww, not two W's, Walter Winston, okay, so www.chura@yahoo.com. You get people confused, thinking they see two W's and they think, oh, it must be a website, it must mean three. No. If you do that, you'll never get me. www.chura, Walter Winston. Can you imagine that? A Ukrainian, French, Canadian guy gets a name like, Walter. Where'd they get that from? But anyway, www.chura@yahoo.com, and I'll be happy to put you on our email list, and you'll know what's going on. Okay. One question: how many of you have read more than one book by Thomas Merton? Quite a few. Okay. How many of you have read at least one book? Okay. Wow, we're doing real well here. Okay, so one of the things I was saying to Joe, this absolutely marvelous book, so wonderfully written. Even the foreword by Rowan Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, beautiful, beautiful foreword. But it's not for the faint of heart. There may be some of you who went ahead and read it, before now, and you will know. This is a very complex book. Divine Discontent, the prophetic voice of Thomas Merton. Moses himself is an Anglican clergyman. He was, St. Paul's Cathedral. He's the Dean Emeritus of St. Paul's Cathedral in London. There is a lot of interest in the Anglican Church in Thomas Merton. He had Anglican correspondence when he was alive. Of course, the Roman Church and the Anglican Church, in good times at least, not in the old days, but in good times like our own, have a lot of dialogue and a lot of theological sharings. So that's where Moses is coming from. The primary essence of the title works its way out as the book develops. Thomas Merton was discontented most of his life. Most of his life. How many of you have read The Seven-Story Mountain? That's the most common. Well, you'll remember that there were a number of things in his early life that would cause a young kid to be traumatized. First of all, his mother died when he was 6 years old. He found out about it because his father came home from a visit to her hospital bed. Oh, can you hear me if I'm not directly on here? Or can you? I should say to the director, Joe, back there, whether you can hear me. I tend to move around when I talk. The way he found out that his mother had died, he knew that she was sick. In fact, he says later on, he talks later on about how cold and unaffectionate he found her to be. The woman was dying of cancer during those formative young years, Tom's young years. The way he found out that she had finally died was his father gave him a note and told him to go out under a tree in the yard and to read it. It was a note from his mother. And that's how he found out that she had died. So he's had this very shaky relationship with his mother to begin with. He finds out about her death in this shocking way for a 6-year-old. After his mother is cremated, his father zips him off to the first of many wanderings, but this first wandering that takes him down south has Tom being basically babysat by one of his father's new lovers, whom he despised. He is then taken by his father, whom, by the way, God, the grace of God, I guess, he adored. for all of the things that Owen Merton did that screwed up Tom's life, he just so admired his father. But at any rate, they left Tom's younger brother with his grandparents in Douglaston on Long Island. And Owen, his father, took Tom off first to France, where he was in a French lycée, which he hated, absolutely hated it, found his fellow students coarse and not to his liking at all. His father was often not with him because his father, who was a landscape artist, as his mother had been also, was off, doing his thing, doing his paintings, and so Tom would be left with other people. One of his first close contacts with Catholicism was a couple that had a farm, and he would often end up staying with them while his father was off doing his painting. Then he spent some time in England at a boarding school that he had some family connections with it. Hated the boarding school as well. It was there when he confirmed to himself that he had lost his faith. One of his signs of rebellion, the little faith that he had. One of his signs of rebellion was when when they had to go to chapel, which they did regularly. One of the things they did was recite the Apostles' Creed, and Tom makes a point in the Seven-Story Mountain that at this time in his life, he made sure to stand straight, keep his mouth shut. He would not say the Apostles' Creed. He had a couple of very interesting experiences when he was young, and which later come into his conversion. One is shortly after his father died. Tom was 16 when his father died, and he had a vision. He was in Rome on a walking tour. I mean, Tom loved to walk. I think he probably would have appreciated, maybe not, but he would have appreciated one of those, what do they call those things that are only two wheels, but you can go around, Segway, yeah. Maybe not, because he liked to walk, but at any rate, he would take walking tours. He took a couple of walking tours in Europe. And on one of these walking tours in his room one night, he felt that his father appeared to him. So for a couple of hours, Tom had a resurgence of faith. Didn't last long, but it was. But at any rate, that's almost enough. You can understand that this kid has had a tumultuous young life, and had a lot of pain. His final, I won't call it final. The denouement of all of these problems comes when he realizes that the only thing that will satisfy his life is to live it fully, and so he became hyperactive as a teenager, as a young adult. When I say hyperactive in a way that only an intellectual like Thomas Merton could become, reading everything, wanting to have new experiences and meet new people and so on. He was so smart that he got a scholarship to Cambridge, and he had a good time at Cambridge. I don't mean he enjoyed getting good marks. I mean he had a good time at Cambridge. And he apparently, as the way it's put in this film about him, he got a young girl pregnant. And his grandfather, who had some money and allowed Tom to be able to do these things, called him home. Might as well, because he lost his scholarship at Cambridge. We don't know, by the way, we don't know what happened to the child. We don't know if the child was born. The mother may have had an abortion. Of course it was illegal, but even when it was illegal, people had abortions. It may have been a stillbirth. The child, it just disappears from anybody's knowledge. But he goes home, and at one point he says his grandfather sent him to oh boy, here comes the senility part. What's the school in New York that he went to? No. Columbia. Yeah, his grandfather sent him to Columbia University, and Tom remarks, it was supposed to be a punishment. But the reality is, it was at Columbia that Tom regained faith. And I'm not going to recount his entire, his entire biography before we jump back into John Moses. But Tom continued. He was always an intellectual. I mean, he was a brilliant person, even as a young man. He had bought himself during one of his trips in Italy. He had bought himself a Latin New Testament, which he could read easily. He read broadly. He wrote a paper on Gandhi when he was at the public school, which means a private school, in England. He wrote a paper on Gandhi when Gandhi was not in big favor, in a lot of favor in England during that period. So he was brilliant. Well, he started out at Columbia, the way he started out at Cambridge. He was a party guy. But because he was involved in so many things, because he was interested in so many things, he finally began to have basically a nervous breakdown. In fact, and this is coming close to the end of what I'm going to tell you about the story in the Seven-Story Mountain. One day, coming in from Douglaston to go to class at Columbia, he really did feel like he was going crazy. So he got off the train at the Penn Station, the Penn Station stop, and he just didn't, he knew he couldn't go to class. So he came out of Penn Station, looked across the street, there was the Pennsylvania Hotel. Everybody know the phone number for Pennsylvania Hotel? 65000. Guess what? That's still the phone number. I went in just to check that. But anyway, he walks into the Pennsylvania Hotel and asks for a room, gets a room. He said if he had been able to open the window, and whatever floor it was on, he couldn't open the window, he said he would have jumped out of it. All right, this is another sign of a different era. So he called for the house doctor. How many hotels you now know have house doctors? But the doctor told him, young man, you are overstressed. You have got to find some way to, we would say today, cool it. So he knew he had to straighten out his life. So he went to a friend who was also a student, a PhD student, while Merton was still an undergraduate, PhD student by the name of Brahmachari. Now, actually, that's not a name, I have found out since. Brahmachari is a Hindu designation of a celibate holy person. It's not a name. But that's how they knew him, as Brahmachari, the other students in Merton's group that Brahmachari was a part of. But he was a wise man from India. He had come over to this country in order to take part in an interfaith gathering by the time he got here. The thing was over, but he didn't have enough money to go back. So he applied for a scholarship to get a PhD from Columbia University and got it. And he was friends with some of Merton's friends. So, of course, Merton is having a psychological and a spiritual crisis. And so he tries to think, who can give him good advice? Who can tell him how to get his stuff together, his mental and spiritual stuff? Brahmachari. So he goes to Brahmachari and he says to Brahmachari, what should I read? Of course, that's what he's going to do. That's how he's going to fix himself. He's going to read. So Brahmachari, the Hindu monk, stranded in America, getting a PhD from Columbia University, says, you should read Saint Teresa and Saint Augustine from your own tradition. And so, of course, Merton did. And there are the seeds of his conversion. Now read Seven Story Mountain and you'll get all the rest of the story as from the 50s. What was that guy who had that? There was Paul Harvey had the rest of the story. Yeah. So, John Moses has done a marvelous job of, first of all, demonstrating that Thomas Merton, who was a pain in the you-know-where to his superiors and sometimes to his fellow monks, who found it absolutely necessary to have as much solitude as possible and to be able to bring as many friends as possible into that solitude with him. Here's a man who is, always in tension. Always in tension. Now, to some of especially his abbots that he has to deal with, sometimes it doesn't look like creative tension. It looks like stubbornness or arrogance or any number of other negative possibilities. Yeah. He was constantly discontented, always looking for something more. Interestingly enough, what he thinks he's looking for is more and more solitude. What he thinks he's looking for is a deeper and deeper contemplative order. And his abbots, the two abbots who were abbots at the monastery of Gethsemane in Kentucky, were constantly trying to guide him, keep him from going off the deep end. Now that paradox that Merton is constantly looking for deeper solitude, continues throughout his whole life. When he finally gets to live in a hermitage that's on the property of the monastery, but up a hill a ways, all right? He loves the solitude. He is deepened by the solitude. So he has to share it with some friends. So there are things like friends that he had from Louisville bringing picnic baskets back into the hermitage from behind, from the woods, or Joan Baez sneaking her way into the woods to sing to him, or to bring him some Bob Dylan records. Always this tension. Always this tension. But God was always moving Thomas Merton in the right direction. And the ultimate, what shall we call it? The ultimate gift that Moses defines for Thomas Merton is that all of this discontentedness grew out from Thomas Merton's prophetic calling. The things that Thomas Merton agonized over, fought for, fought against, can all be seen, as Moses does it, through the lens of a prophetic imagination, to use the title of a book by Walter Brueggemann. Now, let me take you through some specific points in the book. First of all, I would highly recommend to you the foreword by Rowan Williams, because this former Archbishop of Canterbury, thank you, has a real insight into Thomas Merton, good enough that he is going to be the keynote speaker at the upcoming international meeting of the International Thomas Merton Society in Louisville this coming June. And Rowan Williams will be the keynote speaker. I just want to give you here's one little quote from Rowan Williams. As we approach the centenary of Merton's birth, this book provides a coherent and comprehensive reminder of why Merton has mattered and still matters so much to so many diverse readers. He remains hard to categorize, a dangerous ally for anyone looking for support for any kind of party. At his best, and there is so much that is his best, he diagnoses as no one else, both spiritual and political, diseases in the post-war world. And we can still recognize the problems, but equally he displays wonderfully the richness and resourcefulness of the renewed world of the gospel. He gives a summons to life, in a phrase used in this book. I hope there will be many to hear it. That's why Thomas Merton matters. The problems of the post-World War that he diagnosed are still with us, and in many ways become more difficult because of all kinds of our political, social, and even religious landscape today. What Moses does in this book, in a very erudite manner, is to take examples of each of Merton's discontents, each of the examples of Merton's conflict with, first of all, his inner life. He's absolutely, he sees exactly what's going on in his own life. And in the difficulty that he presents, the challenges that he offers, the heartache and the stomachache that he gives to his superiors can easily be looked at from the point of view of the prophets of Israel. And we know from our reading of Scripture, from reading the prophets, that the prophets are not only, if you will, a thorn in the side of the society to which they are trying to bring God's word, but they have a thorn in their own side. And that's the genius of John Moses's book here. The first part of the book, in quite some details, gives us a picture of what it was like, if you will, to try to be the religious guide for this restless and brilliant soul. The second part of the book kind of flips that around and says, basically, I've given you a picture of a real pain in the butt here. I've given you, I've shown you examples of how he was a challenge to those who were given to him by God. Even from Merton's own point of view, he realizes that. As far as he's concerned, they're not hearing it right. But the challenge is to look at Merton and how he faces the difficulties he's having with authority, the internal contradictions that he feels himself, are being used by God to present a message to the world that is still has not been heard, and about problems that still not only continue to exist, but are getting worse and worse. And I offer to you, this is not mentioned in his book, but from my own insight and interpretation of this, I give you the difficulties that are happening in the interfaith world, and especially the wrenching problems of division in the Islamic world. If Merton were writing today, I think one of the things that he would point out to us or suggest to us is that the dynamics that are going on in radical Islam today reflect problems that the Christian church has already gone through. Beheadings, bombings, all kinds of horrible destruction. Have you heard of the Crusades?
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard of the wars of religion among Christian denominations? See, Thomas Merton speaks to those realities and opens our eyes to discover them. But the discontent is just that. It's still a situation of tension. Now, one of the things that doesn't fit this picture from my own tradition and Merton's tradition is Pope Francis. He actually looks like he's got some insight into what's going on and what we need to do to heal the divisions among us. But anyway, so the book basically is divided into two parts. First, the laying the foundation for understanding that, yes, Merton was continually in tension. He was continually disconcerted. He was continually bucking against things that he thought was holding him back from the vocation to which he was called. even with the paradoxes of that vocation, because he insists over and over and over again that his basic vocation is to silence, solitude, and contemplation. But at the same time, he comes to us with a message out of his experience of silence and solitude and contemplation that says, my dear sisters and brothers, this world is screwed up. And what he says to us, what Merton's discontents say to us is, the only way, and this is so un-American, the only way we are going to find a path to peace and solidarity and union and communion in the human race is to understand the importance of going into the center of your being, going into that deepest place, which you cannot get to alone by reading books. He would say, not even by reading my books, unless your heart is ready, as well as your brain, to follow the path that is being shown to you. And the only way to see that path is through giving yourself, not just monks and cloistered nuns, but each and every one of us, from whatever tradition we come from, in the practice of the lessons of each of those traditions, that we must look deeply within ourselves until we find the abyss of God. Until we find the abyss of God, in which we also find, so strangely, the oneness that we share with each other, the divine spark that we share as the human community. So this divine discontent, yes, is brewing in Merton, and he is always trying to find the balance. But he still knows what's going on. He writes, why do I write so much? Why do I talk so much? Why do I think so much? But you see, that's the discontent. The answer is because God is using this discontent that you have to reveal to the people of your age the pathway out of this morass of evils, the evils of nuclear war, the evils of nuclear weapons, whether they're being used or not, of nationalism. I wish we had Thomas Merton here so that we could say to him, we have to accept the fact that we're different from all the other countries. American exceptionalism, We'd see him, I don't mean that he'd fly, I mean, he just burst right through that ceiling right there. Because the truth that John Moses gets to, in I must say, very astute, but at the same time very subtly and very deeply, the discontents not only within Merton but within each one of us, that is part of God's prophetic plan for the world. So it's not an easy read. In one sense, it gives you a map for reading all of Merton. But you almost have to know something about the heart of Merton before you can follow that map that John Moses points out. So one of the discontents, I think, that is not probably not meant by John Moses, but which I experienced in reading this book, is the discontent that I had in some of the more difficult chapters in following his argument. The first part of it, I was almost annoyed, because it was like, wait a minute, does this guy appreciate Merton? Because what he's doing is showing what a pain he was to himself and others. Yeah. Now, if one can pay the close attention one needs to pay to this book, and maybe what I'm revealing here is at first I didn't pay enough attention, was that he's doing this intentionally. He's doing this intentionally to point or to paint a picture of Merton as a difficulty to himself and to those around him. Because the prophetic ministry, the prophetic call, the prophetic imagination, which God gives to his prophets, to her prophets, is going to cause both internal and external turmoil. So when I'm reading the first part of it, I'm thinking, he's kind of picking on Merton here. And it's not hard to paint a picture of Merton being such a difficult person for those around him, for his brothers, for his abbots especially, for the upper echelon in Rome. Although I must say there are some, every once in a while, not every once in a while, a lot, I hear questions from people who don't know Merton at all, who would say, didn't the church censor him? Didn't the church shut him up? No. The church, as in Rome, never tried to shut up Thomas Merton. But the head of the order, the international head of the order, the abbot general, who was a Frenchman and a devout Gaullist, all right, this really strong nationalism, was very annoyed by Merton's political writing, especially his anti-war writing. So the abbot general was the one who basically, was trying to silence Merton. He wrote to Merton's abbot, Dom James Fox, telling him, "You must tell this monk it is not the place of a monk to be writing about war and peace and all these social issues. He is no longer to write about nuclear war, nuclear arms and war and all that stuff. He can't write about that anymore. It's not the place of a monk." Now, James Fox was not happy with that decision. And he knew very well that Thomas Merton wasn't going to be very happy with that decision. But it was that abbot, the abbot general, because of his own social political bent, who put the kibosh on Merton writing about these issues. Actually, the abbot Fox even held the notification back a couple of days. But that's who, silenced Thomas Merton, was the abbot general. What you find in Moses is the realization of that prophetic calling that Merton had, which heard this message, being a, what shall I say, a faithful monk. Being a faithful monk, all right, he followed that order. He stopped publishing on those issues publicly. He wrote a lot of letters. that hadn't been mentioned in the. But Moses's point in detailing, and I mean detailing, these kinds of conflicts, Moses's purpose in presenting this is to say, this on the surface just looks like this, institutional tug of war. It is not just an institutional tug of war. It is a prophetic pattern. It follows the pattern of prophecy in its true sense in the Hebrew Scriptures. And that if we examine carefully each of the difficulties that Merton got himself into, in the various categories, we will find that it follows exactly this prophetic pattern. I want to share with you at least a couple of. How are we doing on time here? One of the I do. By the way, I used to be a bookseller. So, some of the things that I do in book reviews, other book reviewers might not necessarily do. But it's the kind of things that you look at, when a new book comes in, you check these kinds of things out to be able to explain, what's going on. One of the absolute gems of this book, besides the chapters itself, are the, if you will, the extras, the chronology. Now, very often, when someone is writing about a famous writer or famous anybody, you'll get a chronology of their life, okay? The chronology that we get from Moses on Merton's life has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 pages of chronology. He wants you to know what the pattern or he wants to bring back to life in your mind, the pattern of Merton's life. The notes, the footnotes are voluminous. I mean, oh God, it's just, let's see, 215. From 215 to 239 between those pages. So 15 out of 40. I'm lousy at math. What's that? 24. 24 pages. 24 pages of footnotes. Right. Following the footnotes is a real education. I mean, usually footnotes can kind of be let go unless you're doing a term paper. Yeah. But in this case, following the footnotes is very instructive as to John Moses' plan, if you will. Highly recommended. Now, depending upon how much of a Merton novice you are, maybe I recommend that you buy it because you can get a first edition and then you can save it. But you might want to buy it and save it until you've read a little more of Merton. Let me put another, or do some more bookseller type thing. If you're just beginning to look at Merton, okay, he's just come to your consciousness. Maybe you haven't read anything, all right? 2 books that I would recommend as starters. Some people would recommend his autobiography, The Seven-Story Mountain. There's two views of the Seven-Story Mountain, all right? One is from Catholics of my generation who lived, this was, Seven-Story Mountain was published in 48. So I wasn't reading it back then, but I was born in the pre-Vatican II, Roman Catholic Church. Well, the Seven-Story Mountain is about somebody living in the pre-Vatican II Seven-Story Catholic Church. Okay, so if you look back on the pre-Vatican II Catholic Church and say, "Oh God, I'm glad that's over," don't want to go there anymore, you probably won't enjoy the Seven-Story Mountain. It'll annoy you. Because it's got a lot of platitudes from that era. On the other hand, if you're so young that you have no experience of the pre-Vatican II Church, you probably don't want to start with Seven-Story Mountain either, because you're going to say, "Ooh, God, is that what it was like? Ooh." So I don't usually recommend that people start with Seven-Story Mountain. I recommend, unless you just know, if you love beautiful writing, if you have a tolerance for seeing what, or remembering what life was like in that era, if you don't mind, reading somebody who we're talking about as a prophet, who in the Seven-Story Mountain thinks it's terrible that Catholic parents don't send their children to Catholic schools. If you can't let that stuff just kind of, not bother you and float away, then you don't want to read the Seven-Story Mountain to begin with. I would suggest this as my favorite anthology. It's called Thomas Merton, Spiritual Master, The Essential Writings, and it's edited by Larry Cunningham, who was one of the founders of the International Thomas Merton Society. Not our little local group, but the international. And my Merton teacher, the person who introduced me to Thomas Merton, Father Bill Shannon, has a book called An Introduction to Thomas Merton, which is very good, very good. This is an anthology of Merton's works, okay, which I think is the best. There's a bunch of different collections of Merton's works, but this is my favorite. But this takes you through the development of Merton's life, both intellectually and biographically. Okay, and he breaks it up into different characteristics of his life. So if you are fairly new coming to Merton, these two books I would recommend. Now, if you were reading, if you were simultaneously reading, say, the anthology and John Moses's Divine Discontent, you might find it more comfortable than if you were reading Divine Discontent by itself. Yeah, I was just going to say, so that's my recommendation, and it's not to scare anybody away. All right? I'm not trying to scare you away from this book. I'm just telling you it's not a walk in the park. Yes, very much. Please read Merton. Please read Merton. But after you've read, unless you've already done so, then read John Moses. I will say this. I've reviewed a number of books for the Merton Seasonal and other things, about people writing essays about Merton. This is the best I've read. The others have been good, but this has an insight into. I guess maybe it has insights into a part of Merton that I particularly, kind of intuitively felt. And John Moses has put it all together and showed me that my thinking was on the right track. Of course, that's why I liked him. Thank you very much.